Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording it for a radio broadcast on the Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor at Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome to the discussion. My guests today are Roberta Moreau, a principal in the government and public sector practice for Ernst & Young, Cindy Gallagher, a Senior Vice President for Global Business Services at Discovery Communications, Mark Glorioso, the Executive Director of NASA's Shared Services Center, Matt Miller, the Assistant Commissioner for Fiscal Accounting at the Bureau of Fiscal Service in the Treasury Department, and Mark Rieger, the Deputy Controller at the Office of Management and Budget. Welcome to the panel discussion today. Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion. This seems to have the perfect time to have a conversation about shared services. The Trump administration is making a major push for agencies to consolidate back office systems and make them more efficient through the use of shared resources. Starting back in May, when President Donald Trump signed the executive order for cybersecurity, the administration emphasized, and I quote, strong preference in the procurement for shared IT services, including email, cloud, and cybersecurity services. The draft IT modernization strategy released in August and currently being finalized has a whole section on shared services to enable the future network architecture. In the draft document, the administration stated, and again I quote, not only would the widespread use and deployment of shared services in information security provide cost savings, they would also provide a more consistent level of security across the federal enterprise. And then there's the agency reform plans. The administration also highlighted the need for agencies to consolidate and reduce duplication as part of their strategies to restructure both mission areas and administrative efforts. All this focus over the last 6 months or so means shared services are gaining that critical mass that maybe the concept hasn't had over the last 15 years. As we know, previous attempts to consolidate back office systems have struggled. The policies and laws haven't really come together to create an easier environment for shared services, and agencies were slow to understand that changing their business processes were the key to this effort. So what's different today? There's definitely a new sense of urgency across the government for the policy and strategy reasons mentioned above, but also the ever-changing budget environment that agencies are facing adds a new criticality to the discussion. This urgency also comes as a new set of innovations are impacting the marketplace. Robotics, process automation, software as a service, and many others are expected to have a major effect on how providers deliver services in the near future. So, how are agencies and the private sector going to work together to meet this expected demand? And what are some of those innovations that the private sector can bring to government? Well, that's where our panelists come in. So usually I like to start to my left on the discussion, but instead I'm going to start all the way down there with Mark Rieger, our friend from OMB. Mark, there's this urgency that's happening. Give me a sense of this urgency a little bit from OMB's perspective and what's really driving the move to shared services in the broad sense.
So as you said, Jason, we've been on this shared service roller coaster for quite a while, but in this case we're really trying to cut down on the administrative costs, the backroom operations, the mission support functions around the government. And to do that, all the agencies identified, and we really endorsed this shared service concept to try to do something one time and share it amongst many.
So this concept, as you said, has been ongoing. Is there, you've been in government for a couple years now. What's your sense of the difference today versus 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or during the Bush administration, even when the lines of business and all that started really gaining steam?
I think it's a maturity model issue. You know, we've come through a lot of fits and starts. Every one of those has resulted in a stronger outcome on whatever the next generation was. In the current scenario a couple years ago, you'll remember that the real question was around governance. So we formed USSM to work across the lines and trying to make sure that we weren't siloed in our shared service adoption. And we're moving now towards more adoption, and we actually did a lot in the last 10 years to stir up supply, stir up demand amongst the agencies. And we seem to have done a good job of that because now we have a lot more demand than we have supply.
And we're going to get to that supply piece when we talk to Matt and Mark. But first, let me turn to Roberta. From the outsider's perspective, meaning the contractor's perspective, what are you seeing that's different around the urgency for shared services?
I think definitely the increased demand, and organizations are seeing that this is truly a way to improve their operations, drive efficiencies, drive effectiveness, and a willingness to explore different models that could meet their needs. I think the administration, through the reform plans, almost every agency is looked at how can they leverage shared services better, both in the mission space and in the back office operations. And so I think people are leaning into this opportunity.
All right. Mark from NASA, jump in.
I think there's also, especially at the Shared Service Center at NASA, we started using data analytics a while back to get a real baseline for how much services were costing before we transferred them in. And we have spent a lot of time tracking that cost and proving that they are effective. So that a lot of the people who are the naysayers or the people who are skeptical are now seeing some real honest to goodness hard fact data that says you can't dispute the fact that it was cheaper to do simplified acquisition, for instance, in this shared environment.
It's interesting because the baseline data has always been the hardest point. I remember when this got started, when they talked about the lines of business back in the mid-2000s, well, how do you know I'm saving money? Well, what's my cost? Or am I spending the same amount but getting better capabilities? So how did you guys come to that baseline data
all
piece?
All of the above, right? But what we really did was we built a model at the very beginning in a business case. And we went out and we surveyed for almost a year, and we got the real dollars, the actual facts. What are you spending? How much time does it take you? At the end of that process, I sat down with all of the stakeholders and I said, this is the measure we're going to use. This is the yardstick. Everybody's agreeing to that, right? And everybody's nodding their head. So we have on record, this is the real honest to goodness cost. And now we're just tracking to see what we're spending.
So Matt, jump in here, and Cindy, I'm going to come back to you because you're going to bring the private sector perspective. But Matt, are you guys doing very similar to what NASA's doing?
Yeah, absolutely. In Treasury, so we've been providing shared services for about 2 decades, and there's absolutely a proven business case and a strong ROI and success, track record of success. Some of what we struggle with sometimes, though, is, especially in a political environment, is recognizing that the real cost payback or cost savings can be long-term, especially when it comes to the next time you need to modernize. We've got a case study or a proven example where a few years ago we had to do kind of a next-gen modernization of our financial system platform. We did that successfully, and we did it for about $12 to $13 million, not chump change. But when you spread that $12 to $13 million investment over our 30 to 40 customers, each of our customer agencies got a successful modernization of their financial management platform for about $300,000. If each of those 30 entities would have gone off on their own, easily you calculate the savings or the avoidance to the taxpayer of north of $150 million easily. So that's just one example where there's definitely a value proposition financially and non-financially, but sometimes part of the tough sell is the financial savings is more long-term.
Cindy, let me bring you in from the private sector perspective, Discovery Communications. First, just in case if people don't know what you guys do, talk a little bit about what you do, and then talk about where shared services fit into your business model.
Yeah, sure. So Discovery Communications, we are in 220 countries globally. Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, TLC are the major communication channels that most people know us for. I've been with the company for just over 3 years now. And for us, shared services isn't too unlike what I've heard Mark from OMB, Mark and the guys from NASA talk about for several years, frankly. We started looking at, and everyone in the private sector starts this way, looking at cost, right? Just as you mentioned, Mark, with the NASA organization. However, I would add to that, we also look at our quality measures. How are we delivering a higher quality to our business units? And from a cash flow perspective, how are we delivering a return on the cash capital that can be reinvested for us, whether that may be another show, new content, a new product, a new mobile device, mobile product. But the cash flow, that working capital opportunity is a huge yet untapped opportunity within shared services.
Mark.
We have, for 10 years at the Shared Service Center, been very diligently tracking our SLIs. We have maintained a high quality service. That was the first thing that we attacked. And it was over that 10-year period of time where we realized what people want to see is, yes, it's a better service, yes, it's a good service, what are you saving me in dollars? And that's kind of the evolution we made, but yes, do not sell short. The quality and the higher quality is probably the first thing you really want to tout when you're doing shared services. Very good catch.
Let me bring in Mark Rieger from OMB. The dollar figures, everyone likes to focus on the dollar figures, and that's nice, but it's bigger than that now, I think. I think it's capabilities, it's security, there's so many other pieces.
It has gotten a lot more important, Jason, and a lot more normal that we try to look at the federal government from a holistic way. And right now we're a division of a whole lot of very large companies, amongst the largest in the world. Any one of our agencies is on par with nations around the world. And so in order to look at the federal government more holistically, we need standard data. We need to be able to collect information from these agencies in a way that we can actually run the government in a more efficient and effective manner.
And when you talk about standard data, I got to bring up the Data Act. I know that's been a priority for you guys at OMB. Is that the piece of that, or is it more than just the Data Act, because that looks at procurement, but there's these other baseline things that, as Mark and Cindy talked about? Well,
the Data Act did some really important things for us. It is just the start, so let's not assume that everything's great at this point. But in reality, it is the first time we've linked major systems, procurement systems and accounting systems together, and allows the finance people to be able to look at the procurement activity across the spectrum. Hopefully in the future we'll add in other, as we increase the data quality around the Data Act activity, which I'm sure is going to be difficult in the first couple iterations. We're 2 quarters in now, and things are much better than they were in the first quarter in. So we're expecting that quality will improve remarkably, and as it does, we'll add in other kinds of data that we have.
Matt.
Yeah, I would just say not to undersell at all the importance of standards, and it's not just data standards, but in shared services. I mean, that's the bedrock principle of shared services, is there has to be standardization and reuse. Without that, it's just services. It's not shared services. So it's not just data standards. It's common system standards and baselines. It's internal control standards. It's business process standards. When you have those standards, then that reduces the risk on so many other aspects, whether that be system modernizations, reducing risk, clean audit opinions, or you mentioned Data Act, even on being able to successfully implement and meet new government-wide mandates when you have standards.
Jason, can I just add?
Sure, jump in.
Just so you know that currently the Chico Council is working on talent management standards. The CFO Council is working on core accounting process standards. The GSA is working on new travel standards. Grants Office is working on grant standards for grants. You remember the 2 pilots that came out of the Data Act. The IT group is working on security standards, and DHS is working on procurement standards. So we have a lot of standard setting activity, all of which has been generated by this interest in shared service.
And let me just pull on that, because I know a couple of people want to jump in. When you talk about standards, you're basically talking about the 80-20 rule, or 90-10, or whatever you want to call it, where what do agencies do that are basically the same, and let's standardize across that?
That's right. You're not trying to accomplish everything for everybody. Agencies are unique. But we're trying to get the commonality together and then define that, so the things that we all do the same, we can look at those.
Roberta, jump in.
So the standardization, as everyone's talking about, is critical for moving forward. And I would say, the current state across all of the federal government, we've only taken advantage of shared services mostly from an IT platform perspective. I mean, most agencies, if they've gone to a shared services, it's to leverage an IT platform, and they're missing out on the benefits of leveraging the people and the processes. So most organizations, which certainly have happened on the commercial side, they can see 20 to 50% savings in cost savings, but also improvement in quality, looking at the full picture of different delivery models. So now you're getting the economies of scales, you're looking at different organizational, span of control, as well as better way of working, right? Standardizations, process standardizations, automation, we have an opportunity to really embrace the full benefit that shared services could provide us.
And I think you make a great point that IT was the easy one, so to speak. And we saw payroll, and I always like to use this as an example that with all due respect, Mark, OMB should bring down the hammer more often on stuff like payroll, but we're not going to put Mark on the spot on that one. That's my little soapbox I like to jump in. Cindy, let me turn to you, get Mark off the hook. When you talk a little bit about the cost savings and better quality, have you guys seen that?
We have, absolutely.
I was going to, hopefully you were going to say no.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Point.
Right, and no, we absolutely have. And to the point that was being made on standardization, I would like to add the word expectation setting. Phrase expectation setting to that. When you have standardization across all of these platforms, whether it's procurement, IT, payroll, other working capital initiatives, other finance, HR, and IT processes, and you set that out, your clients and your internal customers know what the expectations are. Right? You need to set that first. And then from there, you can drive the quality improvement. But you know what your measuring stick is, to use a word we've used earlier today. You know what the client's expectations are, and you know how to meet them. In fact, you can then exceed them once you have that set.
And the expectation is key. Mark, jump in.
It's interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about that hammer statement. NASA spent the last year looking at developing some kind of a federal shared services model. And we kept on with that mentality, if we build it, they will come. And actually what I think we've learned is if they come, we will build it. And they're not coming unless there's a real good reason to come, and it really isn't even. We can say how good it is, we can show how good it is, but until somebody like OMB comes out and says, thou shalt do this, I think that the growth will be slow and it will continue to take a long, long time.
But let me pull Matt into this as well, because you have a similar challenge. The supply and demand issue, as Mark said at the beginning, there's a huge demand now, and you know, we see it as we go to shared services events and you hear people talk about it, and then you as the shared service providers are facing a tough road because you can't always meet the demand because your supply is limited, generally speaking. So I don't know if you want to respond real quick.
I'd love to respond to that because the Shared Service Center at NASA has the capability, but it's not our mission.
Yeah.
I'm not, as a NASA civil servant, really all that interested in providing shared services for some other agency because it's going to water down my mission. It's going to make my upper management at NASA very interested in what's going on at the Shared Service Center, and we got to fly spacecraft. Right. And I was a big advocate for we need some kind of a government corporation or an independent entity that's doing these shared services who has as their mission that. And it's been interesting to watch the NFC, the National Finance Center evolution. There's rumors, and I won't put words in anybody's mouth, but there's certainly rumors that the Secretary of Ag is saying, why are we doing that again? So there's something to be said about this as agencies providing for other agencies is probably not the best model.
That's a tough place to take a break, but we're going to have to take a quick break. So Matt, hold that thought. We'll come back to you. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Tipping Point for Federal Shared Services, sponsored by Ernst & Young on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.